Hello and welcome to my gig survival video. In this video I'm going to show you the basic items I take to every gig to make sure that no matter what, I'm covered and I'm going to be able to make it through the show. I have a bag of stuff here and I'll have a list on the blog showing the things that I think you should consider taking to gigs to make your life that little bit easier and more professional. Apart from all of the things that you need to play your instrument, so I consider this, you look at your guitar, you need a strap, your guitar, your leads, any of your pedals, any power connections, cables to your amp, amp stands, extension lead, anything between you and the power point is a must. That's not part of this kit. That should already be something you're packing to take to a gig. So the first item in my survival bag, in no particular order, is a spare guitar lead. Now I use curly cables between my guitar and my pedal board because that way they don't get caught up under my feet or get stuck under any wah, volume or expression pedals. So I have a spare curly cord. Of course, in complement to that, I have a spare cable that is long enough to go from my pedal board to my amp. This particular cable is 6 meters long. It's got this great Tech Flex coating on it, so it's really durable. It can run across the stage, and if somebody stands on it, kicks on it, falls on it, it's going to last the gig. The next thing in the bag is some A4 paper and a folder to write on. I can write a set list on this. I can make song cues, lyric cues, tempos, directions for the lighting guy, or maybe a sign for the merch desk. Very, very handy to have. And of course, a permanent marker. I can write on set lists, or I can make settings on pedals or amps. Maybe you're being the really, really nice person and loaning your amp to somebody else in another band. You can mark your settings with this and know that no matter what they do, your amp sound will be just like you sound checked, and the sound guy will love you for it. I also have a lead pencil, or a graphite pencil as it technically is. Very handy for making non-permanent marks. And if your strings slip in your guitar, you get that plinking noise as you're tuning up, you can pull the string out, you can rub a little of the graphite out into the nut, and it'll help to lubricate that and make sure your guitar stays in tune for the rest of the gig. Probably the most important thing you should be taking to a gig as a guitarist is strings. Spare strings in the gauge of the guitar you've got, enough that you can put one set on at the gig if you have to, and you still have a spare set left over. Maybe talk to the other guitarist in your band if you've got one, make sure they've got spare strings, or make sure that at least between the two of you, you can be covered. There's nothing worse than breaking a string at a gig and not being able to do anything about it. Of course, as you get more and more professional, you'll probably arrange to have a spare guitar on stage, on a stand, tuned up, ready to go. But I would consider a spare set of strings, even for the spare guitar, an absolute must. On the topic of changing strings, a string winder, a very, very basic item, can make that string change a very, very effective management of your time on stage. This particular one is the Dean Markley Turbo Tune. I like this because I can fit it to an electric screwdriver. I don't tend to do that at gigs, but it was a purchase I'm able to use at home, in my workshop, and in my gig bag. You can get the Dunlop ones. We'll have a link in our description below for a pretty cool, inexpensive way of doing that as well. I also take a pair of needle nose pliers with a cutting blade here in the corner of the jaws. We can cut those strings off. I can bend the corners of them over so they're not sharp. And if you really needed to, you could use the needle nose end to tighten the jack on your guitar. Very, very handy tool to have. Of course, having done this for a long enough time, I eventually bought a multi-tool. This is a Leatherman. I've got that cutting surface that I can cut strings on. I can make any bending on the ends of the strings. It's also got a Phillips head screwdriver, so I can do up the strap button on my guitar. It's got a little set of cutters and a file, so maybe you need to cut a broken nail or do something like that. It's very handy. The other thing I bought this particular model for is because, I'll pull this out and try and hold it up so you can see, but it has a very, very small bit driver. Now the Phillips head bit on this particular one is the exact size I need to adjust the bridge on my Fender Jazzmasters. That was a big buying point for this particular model. On the topic of doing adjustments to your guitars at a show, I picked this little tool up, and it's a jack adjustment. So I can put this over the end of the nut on my output jack and tighten that up to stop it cutting out and being noisy. Of course, your guitar needs to be in tune, and if you're changing your strings on the fly, a clip-on tuner is the absolute minimum thing you should have to do that with. My pedal board always has a tuner on it, but this can be helpful backstage when you've changed your strings and you're just trying to stretch them in before you play. You can make sure that you're at tension for the best possible result once you walk out on stage. Of course, I use different picks at gigs, so I need to carry spares. I picked this headphone container up from a local stationery shop. I think it was $1, and in it I can fit about 50 different picks. It's very, very handy. They're all in one place, and if I have to shake my bag, it's pretty easy to find. And then lastly, I have a huge pedal board. It's silly, it's not a good example, but if you're at a show and you've got maybe 2 or 3 pedals, a couple of spare 9-volt batteries is an absolute must-have. Even if you don't use it, you should have them there just in case. Maybe your amp dies and you need to borrow somebody else's amp that doesn't have a distortion channel and you are left to use an overdrive pedal instead of the amp itself. You are going to need a battery to power that pedal. It's very, very important. Some acoustic guitars also take 9-volt batteries, so it's pretty handy to have those on hand. So there you go. That's my quick grab bag to survive gigs. It's pretty easy to put this stuff together over a short period of time. As I mentioned, the most important thing I think you should have is some spare strings, spare picks, and a spare lead, just to make sure that you are as ready to go as you can be, even if it's your first time on stage. If you head over to the blog, I'm going to have a list of all of this stuff there and maybe an order of priority or things I would consider as alternative items. You can check out our store, which will have a list of our suggested products and versions of these items that you can pick up as you're doing more of those gigs yourself. And I'll talk a little bit more about my experiences and why these items have been really handy to get me or my fellow bandmates out of trouble. The last point I would make to survive a gig is be nice to the sound guy. Be nice to the other bands. You want to go over and above to be as helpful as you possibly can, because that's the kind of thing that will get you invited back for gigs and make sure that your community of people are always friendly to you. So if you do have to borrow a piece of gear or jump on the bill to get your gigging hours up, that's the kind of thing that's going to make a really big difference. So be nice, be good to everyone. If you've enjoyed this video, don't forget to give us a like, a thumbs up, or share, a follow. And of course, I'll see you in the next video. Thanks again for watching.